So back in the day, I don't know, 20 years ago now, it feels like forever ago, but we were doing in Boulder, Colorado, a big movement. It wasn't just in Boulder, but it happened to be here around authentic relating. And part of the practices were about becoming more vulnerable and being more authentic, like having our speaking be a more authentic version of what's actually happening for us. And it was all different genders, and it was a really special time in my life. But it was an interesting navigation around, especially men who identified as men, males who identified as men, and they're bringing themselves forward more vulnerably. Because there would be times when it was coming a little bit from this place that was collapsed, like we've talked about before, where it's like it's almost like they're speaking to their moms. And there's nothing wrong with this journey of development around sharing vulnerability, sharing vulnerable pieces. But it was hard to receive when it is hard. It's hard for me, I should say. It's hard for me to receive vulnerability when it's coming from a collapsed place. And
can I ask you about that?
yeah.
So I know what that, I think I know what you're pointing toward. I mean, I can remember, plenty of times where I felt like I was going toward my mom with something when, I'm coming to you with it, but I'm, projecting the mom experience onto you. What does it feel? I mean, what exactly does it feel like to you when a man comes toward you with that energy?
The energy specifically that I'm talking about is the one where it's like the feeling of him needing something or wanting something from me that he knows that he wants, but he's expressing it in a way that is attempting to have me feel like I need to figure out what he wants. So
That's
it's
what you
very
mean by the
nuanced.
mom.
Yeah, it's very nuanced here because you can come to me at times with a need and not know what you want, and that's totally fine. But it's almost like if it's that there's a hidden agenda, that's what it is behind the communication that's not being revealed. That doesn't feel good to me.
That makes sense. These guys in these workshops were taking the vulnerable step toward trying to express themselves. And
Yeah.
sometimes they were coming in a collapsed vibe. And what did you say to them when they
Well,
did
by
that?
the way, they were so brave to even be in this experiment. The experiment really was this panel of women. These guys were getting coached by guys about how to be more authentic and more vulnerable. So they were very brave. So I want to say that. But they would come and they would share, if they shared with a place of hidden agenda, that we were feeling a hidden agenda, not to say they were. The reflection back was mostly like, I don't feel safe right now, or I don't feel like I want to interact with you right now. So it was some sort of reflection back to them of what the impact actually was for us as authentically as we could share.
Mm-hmm.
But there is another kind of vulnerability that I think is the next stage when you get developed in your vulnerability journey, which is actually really owning your experience and owning everything that you're consciously aware of and bringing that to the table with it.
There's an example of that.
Back then, it might have been something like, I find you really beautiful and I have no idea what to do about it. Versus
Mm-hmm.
versus
Yeah.
like, hi, I like you.
Right. So it sounds like one way to say it is telling the truth about what's present inside the experience.
I would say that that's a big part of it. And if it's taking responsibility for that, so really owning one's experience, I feel this way. My interpretation of you right now is versus you make me feel XYZ or
Yeah.
that kind of communication.
Mm-hmm. So when the approach is read and revealed and, well, let's say in a clean way,
Yeah.
these, I mean, sounds like an opportunity for men to in this workshop to actually get direct feedback that they maybe never get in a dating situation,
Usually
or
not.
almost never.
Yeah. Unless there's, women who are really committed to doing that and sharing that in a way that is also clean, and not projecting back onto the guy as much as she can. But yeah.
Well, and that speaks to, I think, where you were going a minute ago about maybe right before the break. You said something about there's some subtleties here in the way to relate to someone sharing vulnerability with you. Now, can you say more about that?
Well, I think number one is, if you're listening to this and you're subscribed to our Art of We view of what's possible for couples, it's really about, elevated partnership and probably doing partnership in a way that hasn't been modeled to you before, and really committing to do partnership as a way to support each other's individual expressions in the world. So we're really in this to support each other. If your partner is coming to you with any kind of vulnerability, I think the first thing is to really care for them, no matter what that activates in you. It could activate compassion, it could activate trigger, whatever the thing is that they're coming with. The hope and the stand is to really meet them where they are and work as a team to get through what's ever needing to get through. So that's number one. I think number two is if it is activating material that's coming towards you, or you're activated by their material, then that feels like it's a really important moment to slow down. Also, notice what's happening for you in that moment. So noticing your own activation, being able to name it and work through it together versus just pull up your big girl panties, so to speak, and pretend like you're not impacted.
Mm-hmm.
So it could look like if you came to me with a vulnerable comment that also had an agenda attached to it and I got triggered, I might say something like, if it wasn't a super big trigger, I might say something like, I'm noticing that it feels like there's something else behind what you're saying. Can we take a deeper look to see if there's something that you're really wanting and needing here that you're not naming? So I'm not excluding my experience, but I'm bringing it in and inviting you into to look, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've received that kind of inquiry from you before, and it helps me to be curious about my own experience when you say it that way. So it's helpful.
Yeah, and it's tricky too because as we've talked about on this podcast, there are so many different parts operating inside of each of us at any given time. But I think it really comes back to how do we get through this as a team? And that's been something that we've been navigating lately around a bunch of ruptures is like, okay, how can we relate as a team here and be on each other's side and make it through this and look from that angle versus look at it from you versus me. And I think that can be really helpful in these moments of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, going back to the stand and the commitment that we have to be for each other's success and see it through. It calls us to be a more developed part of our version of ourselves.
Exactly. And I'll also say the way that you approached me this morning, inquiring about what my facial expressions were and how you did that was awesome. Like it has me want to come towards you, and I'm really excited to be in the conversation because we're figuring something out together. And I so appreciate you taking a risk there. It felt risky to you, it sounded like. Is that right?
And at the same time, I've um, had enough reps with you at this point in our relationship that I trust that I'm going to be received in a um, kind and generous and compassionate way. And also, the other thing that keeps pushing me forward in this area in my life is resource of I'm so curious about attachment research, and I think it's so fascinating that Stan Tatkin likes to say that we make mistakes all the time with our partners, and
Mm.
so this misinterpretation of what's on your face is something that is very real, and it's been shown in research how many mistakes people make with their partners of misreading their expressions and then responding from a misunderstanding, and then that makes it even worse. And so
Mm.
I'm just to getting a lot better at accurate reads on your face. And I don't, at this point, I don't know a better way to do it than to check out when I think I'm wrong or might be wrong.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And just a note for those listening, if I'm understanding correctly, this also comes from a big pattern of how you were with your mom when you were young, is reading her face. You didn't know at that point, because you were so young, how to interpret or how to check out what her expressions were saying, other than to assume you knew and operate that way. Does that sound correct?
It's probably true for all infants,
Mm-hmm.
with their caregivers. I think that, bless her heart, my mom had a lot of suffering that she was in, and it was a really tough situation. And so, no need to go into the details right now, but I think that she often felt that the best thing she could do for me and my sister was to put on a face of that she was doing okay when it was pretty obvious that she wasn't. So it was kind of a version of what you're talking about in the workshops with the men, where you could tell if you check in, with your intuition, that there's something else going on that's not being
Right.
talked about. So I think that I had a lot of training in looking at facial expressions and trying to understand what's really going on. Um, and it was all from positive intent, of trying to take care of us, and I think not let us in on how hard things were at times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of like an unfortunate side effect of trying to cope with not enough resources in the space.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, but I think it's something that everyone can relate to, and it's certainly a fascinating body of research if you ever want to go into it.
So on the flip side, I just before we close, I want to add too that, if you're somebody who comes to your partner with what you would call vulnerability, and you're not getting the kind of care and response and impact that you want to have with bringing your vulnerability, potentially there's a way that you're bringing it that is hard for your partner to be with.
Hmm.
So I
There's
feel
also a
like
possibility that your partner is not wanting to be vulnerable and they're freaked out by you being vulnerable. And so maybe
totally
maybe they're not friendly to your vulnerability because they are not yet friendly to their own.
right. So I feel like there's an invitation here for that conversation to happen. And maybe even check it out with your partner of like, hey, it seems like whenever I bring something tender or vulnerable or raw, you go away or you respond this way or XYZ. So can we have a conversation about that? But also, I like to invite all of us to take more responsibility and agency and relational vulnerability. And by relational vulnerability, I'm like, everybody here is included. It's not just about me, but we're having a we experience here. So, how do we work through that? I invite everybody to really practice taking more responsibility in their own vulnerability and also looking to see what is it that I actually need here or want here, and can I bring that in as well?
A good place to stop today.
Anything else? Last thoughts you want to add? You're shaking your head. No. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Will, and thank you, listener, for being with us on this journey. And we would love to hear from you with any topics or thoughts that you have about the topics that we're talking about. You can reach out to us at kristavanderveer.com. And we'll talk with you next week. Take care.